Doing that?
We are recording.
Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Okay, I'd like to call to order the City of Sumner City Council study session. The date is the 8th of March and the time is 6 p.m. Would note that all council members are present. And also like to remind everyone, as we've dealt with the last year, the City Hall remains closed during Governor Inslee's Healthy Washington Roadmap to Recovery Order, consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the public has been invited to attend the meeting virtually by using the Zoom meeting access information on our website and on the council agenda. With that, we have a busy evening tonight. We've got 4 items under regular business. First item has to do with Sound Transit Realignment Update. Now there's a title for you, Austin, thank you. And I will turn it over to City Administrator Jason Wilson, who then will turn it over to Sound Transit.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm pleased to introduce you to Austin Nielsen. I think many of you have met him before. He's the Government and Community Relations Officer for the South Corridor for Sound Transit. Tonight, the agency will be here discussing their realignment process and their strategy, and also provide an update of where the Sumner parking garage sits as part of that realignment effort. So with that, I'll turn it over to Austin, and he'll introduce his team and has a slide deck for you.
Thank you very much, Jason. And I'm going to pull up my slides right now, which I hope will go off without any difficulty. Hopefully everyone's able to see a big blue Sound Transit screen. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you very much, Mayor Pugh and council members, for the opportunity to be with you virtually this evening. I look forward to the day when we can all be together in City Hall again, doing these in person, hopefully very, very soon, but really appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight. I'm joined tonight by some members of my team from Sound Transit, Matt Sheldon, who's our Deputy Director of Planning and Integration, as well as John Michaels, who is our Project Director for the Sumner Garage. And wanted to provide you, Mayor and Council, and the Sumner community an update with how Sound Transit has been responding to the many challenges that the COVID and the COVID recession have presented the agency, as well as the status of the Sumner Garage. Like Sumner and many communities across the Puget Sound in our state and country, the recession has caused a number of challenges for Sound Transit as an agency. And with greatly depleted revenues and higher construction costs, Sound Transit will not be able to deliver many of its expansion projects on their original timelines, unless the agency is able to secure some alternative revenues from federal state sources. To look at how this process can impact individual projects such as the Sumner Garage, the agency has begun a process called Realignment, where the Sound Transit Board of Directors is working to determine how plans and timelines for all voter-approved projects will need to be adjusted to address these financial pressures. So tonight, I just wanted to provide some context as to where the Sumner Garage fits into that, and then hand it over to Matt, who can talk a little bit more in detail about the recession's impacts on the agency and how Sound Transit is responding to those, as well as next steps in that process. So with the Sound Transit realignment process, that is going to pertain to all projects that were not in construction at the start of the COVID pandemic last year. Unfortunately, the Sumner parking garage that we've been working with so long for the city was not quite to that threshold and was placed on pause, like many other projects that were not in the construction phase. Throughout last year and into the fall, the Sound Transit Board began to examine realignment and look at the economic impacts that the recession is presenting on the agency and projects. And in September of last year, adopted a motion 2020-54 that would specifically pertain to some short-term actions with the Sumner, Kent, and Auburn parking and access projects that were, as you know, included in Sound Transit 2. And that board motion authorized Sound Transit staff to execute what's called a design build project management consultant contract, or DBPM, with a specific focus to look at how we as an agency could explore cost savings through project delivery to help keep those projects on track. We're expected to have an update on some of those findings later this year, and we'll be sure to provide this mayor, council, and the Sumner community with information on that when it becomes available. For all projects like the Sumner Garage and others that were not in construction, the Sound Transit Board has adopted a realignment schedule that is a goal of adopting specific decisions and timelines for specific projects as soon as July of this summer in 2021. And to explain a little bit more about that process and how the agency is approaching that, I'd like to hand it over to Matt to talk a little bit more about how we got here and what lies ahead.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Matt Sheldon. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Planning and Integration at Sound Transit, and I'm one of the folks that is helping our Board of Directors work through the realignment process. Before we jump into that, though, I'm just going to give you a quick update on kind of where we stand with ridership and service. Next slide, please. So not surprisingly, when the pandemic hit last spring, we saw some pretty steep declines in use on the transit system. And that pretty much bottomed out late last spring. And since that time, we've been running at about 70 to 80% of our normal pre-COVID ridership on our system. A lot of our commuters are now staying home and working remotely. But we do have still a core of folks that are using the system that don't have a choice. You know, they need to get to essential jobs or transit dependent and the like. Ridership and service are mostly stable. I would note, you know, particularly over the holidays, we had a little bit of a challenge with operator shortages. Our services are by and large operated on our behalf by contracted public transit agencies down in Pierce County. That's Pierce Transit. They saw a pretty stable operator situation, but we had some challenges elsewhere in the system. We have had to suspend some bus routes during this period. We are hopeful that as the pandemic begins to wane this year, knock on wood, that we will begin to restore services around the district. And then finally, I'll note that we are operating long train sets as much as we can so that we can really promote social distancing. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot of what we're running at the moment. On Sounder, we're running about 2/3 of our pre-COVID service, 9 Sounder South round trips, and we're running about half of our normal service on the North Line up to Everett. We're running Link light rail service every 12 minutes during the peak right now, 15 minutes in the off-peak and weekends, and 30 minutes late at night. We are looking forward, however, to improving that service level to every 8 minutes when we get to the fall and we open our new Northgate Link extension. Tacoma Link has been operating at full service throughout the pandemic. And then, as I noted, there's kind of a mix of things going on with ST Express, with some routes at full service, particularly in the south end, other routes on partial service, and some routes suspended. Next slide. Just to give you a little sense of kind of the public information that is out there to try to encourage folks to ride safely. We have a passenger communications effort underway, really promoting masking and social distancing. We're really also asking people to pay for their fares with touchless as much as they can. Next slide. We are giving out free masks. We've been doing this for quite a while, and in the last month or so, we've really begun to step it up and have begun to make masks available on the vehicles for folks to take as they need them. Next slide. And then really trying to promote safety throughout the entire system. A couple of attributes there. We are sanitizing the vehicles and the stations daily, and are doing what we can to improve airflow on all of our vehicles. Next slide. And then we recently launched an All Aboard campaign, which is really to promote both that personal health safety, but also inclusion on our buses and trains, really trying to make sure that people understand the services for everybody. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the realignment situation. Next slide. Just as a reminder, this is a graphic that shows where Sound Transit receives its revenues. You can see that we're heavily sales tax dependent. And as the economy has gone into recession during the pandemic, we've felt that. Sales tax is down, Motor vehicle excise taxes are down. Property taxes, not so much. Fares have largely disappeared during this period, not entirely, but very, very depressed because of the ridership situation. And then we do also have the ability to issue debt or bonds to help finance our program. Next slide. So the financial challenges really are encapsulated here. We have challenges both on the revenue side that I noted in terms of lower tax receipts, but we are also seeing pressure on our construction costs. And those really are coming in two main areas. The first is continued growth in property values. And then the second factor is the hot construction market. During the pandemic, neither of these things in the Puget Sound region have really abated. And in fact, in our more urbanized areas, we're seeing significant increases in property acquisition costs because properties that we planned on having be vacant when we did the planning several years ago have now been redeveloped, and we're looking to have to actually buy much more expensive property to complete our projects. Next slide. This slide really is the bottom line, if you will. Over the next 25 years, 20 years, we're looking at about $6 billion less revenue over the life of the program. And we're looking at about double that in terms of cost increases across the entire program. So combined $18 billion hole that we need to figure out how to rectify. It's not all bad news in that we do have some ability to begin to fill that hole with some unused debt capacity. We are looking to receive larger grants at this point because the size of the program has increased, and we have a few other revenue sources to help offset the impact. However, we're still looking at about an $11.5 billion affordability gap, which is a little bit north of 10% of the overall value of our capital program. Next slide. So this slide details sort of what are the main tools that the Sound Transit Board of Directors has at its disposal to be able to address this problem. The first is cutting costs. And when cost increases on a number of our projects really began to become apparent late last year, the board decided to bring on an independent, an independent cost review consultant to take a look at our methodologies and make recommendations about where we might make improvements. That work is happening this spring, and we expect to begin to hear results of that in April. The board also has the ability to delay or phase projects to spread costs over time and to keep us within our debt and legal financial limits. This is a tool that the board has used in the past when we've had financial challenges. As you know, the Sumner parking garage is a great example of an ST2 project from the 2008 ballot measure that has been delayed as a result of having to rebalance the program in the past. But I want to really emphasize here that the board is looking hard at raising additional revenues. And there are a number of sources out there that are possible. None of them are guaranteed. The board is taking a look at additional opportunities for federal funding, both in terms of the programs that the Federal Transit Administration administers that we're already participating in at the federal level, but also through options such as the COVID relief packages that Congress is discussing right now. And then there is a lot of discussion right now as the state legislature is in session about whether the state can be helpful in moving through this set of challenges. Next slide. So this slide lists the factors that the Sound Transit Board is using to help make assessments of what to do about the realignment challenge. When things began to become apparent last summer, the board took an action at that time to identify this set of criteria as the things that they wanted to weigh as they move through realignment. And they've asked staff to use these in assessing the various projects that are subject to realignment. I want to draw your attention to the fourth one here, which is tenure. The board made a very specific decision last summer to make sure that projects that have been waiting for a while, like the Sumner Garage, that is a main consideration that they want to weigh as they move forward with figuring out how to rebalance the entire program. Next slide. So this is my last slide, and then I'll stop and see if you have questions. But this is just an outline of what we think the path forward to getting to realignment decisions will look like. We're now in March. The board is talking about approaches for getting out and engaging with the public and what kinds of alternatives to seek feedback on. We anticipate then in April and probably into May having a public engagement process. At that same time, we expect the independent cost review consultant to be coming back with recommendations for the board's consideration. And then the May-June timeframe is when we expect the board will begin to frame up priorities and actually develop approaches to realignment that they want to move forward. And then in July, we're anticipating that they will take some action at that time to frame out exactly what steps do they want to take to realign the program moving forward. So let me stop there, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matt. I got a couple of questions, but I'll yield to the council first and let them get their questions out to you. Council members, any questions or comments? Go ahead, Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually have a couple of questions that I wanted to kind of clarify with. I think, Matt, this might be your area. One of them is the parking garage for Sumner was funded under ST2, correct?
That is correct.
So ST2 funds are still available, or were they leveraged toward ST3 projects?
When ST3 passed, the entire financial plan for Sound Transit was melded. So there isn't a separate ST2 pot and a separate ST3 pot. We have one financial plan that we have to manage for the entire system. So those ST2 projects like Sumner that still had yet to be completed were subsumed under that.
Okay, so it's a cumulative result from the multiple ST2 and 3 packages.
Correct.
The other one is we currently have a finalized existing agreement for the garage at 4.5 stories, correct?
I'll have to defer to Austin or John for that.
That's correct. Yeah, there's been a series of board motions over the life of the project that have better defined both the net parking and the general height and bulk of the facility. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, because I remember one of my first things as council about 5 years ago was we were going through the design and finalization and getting to the 4.5 story mark. And I know it's run into several delays for various reasons again since then on being built. And so is it being anticipated that the garage is one of the items that's going to get pushed aside or delayed until a later date?
So it's too early to tell exactly where the board will land on how to rebalance the program. The Sumner parking garage is one of the projects that is subject to realignment because it has not moved into construction yet. But that's the process that we think will play out here through the spring and into the summer. What the exact form of the decision will be in the summer has yet to be defined. You know, whether the board will choose to put new delivery dates on every project or whether they will take a more let's see how it goes approach. That's what will unfold over the spring.
Hey, one item we have articulated, communicated back up to the board for considerations that Sumner in particular was, I think we could best use the term shovel ready in the sense that we had developed the procurement documents, the project criteria closely with the city to develop even the initial land use application. And so what we like to say is we're ready to go when the board is ready to prioritize projects.
And this one, my last question, you may not have the answer for, because you had referenced that tax collections are down significantly. And I get that with some of the, in some cases, some of the vehicle excise taxes, but sales tax, and I know state revenues in general are actually 7% above the previous year. I know there's other factors there, but I'm assuming that that did not affect the revenue streams for Sound Transit then?
Well, I think in the short term, we're seeing the same thing, that, the projections for this coming year may actually be a little bit better than we originally thought. The challenge for us is that we have to project out over 20 plus years because we've got to deliver the entire capital program over that period. So, the net effect of the pandemic is that revenues dropped and we're kind of starting from a new base of growth, if you will. So that's, we will see how that plays out. We are anticipating another update to our finance plan here this spring. And fingers crossed, maybe we'll have some better news on the revenue side. But at least at the time we did those projections last fall, that $11.5 billion affordability gap that I mentioned is sort of what we think we're dealing with at the moment.
So the 11.5 billion is cumulative for the entire Sound ST3 package based on projections. It's not a net 11.5 current in the hole.
Correct. It's over the life of the program, and it's for the entire Sound Transit program, not just Sumner, for instance. It takes us all the way out through 2041 for all of the things that we need to deliver.
Okay. And last quick comment is I definitely look forward to seeing the 4.5 story that we like you mentioned, John, that it's kind of shovel ready for quite a while now, that that we went through all that work on more than 5 years ago and several years before I got on board. So I think 10 or more years since the whole process started for the garage. But thank you. I'll end it with that.
Thanks, Patrick. Go ahead, Barb.
I just was wondering, are you anticipating the growth that we're expecting? Because I live, half a block from the parking lot, and I just know that before the pandemic that, we were always so overcrowded. And so with the garage, and then what are some of the plans maybe to have, like they bring people down from Bonnie Lake? Are you looking at other parking areas?
Well, it's an interesting question, because at the moment, as I mentioned early on, our ridership is down significantly, and particularly on our commuter-oriented services like Sounder and some of the XT Express routes. As the pandemic begins to wane, we'll have to watch carefully to see how riders return to the system and whether we end up sort of back at that same very robust ridership level with the same kinds of pressures on parking. I personally think we probably will end up back there in that same situation at some point. It may take a little while, though, to kind of get back to that same level before we see that kind of demand return.
Thank you.
Okay, any other council members, questions or comments? Go ahead, Cindy.
Thank you. Is Puyallup Garage moving forward?
Yes, the Puyallup Garage was baselined and moved into construction before the pandemic hit. So I believe we are in construction down there. Is that right, John?
I can provide a brief update to that. As you know, we were developing Sumner and Puyallup almost in parallel. And we had issued notice to proceed to our design build contractor. I believe it was, could be April 16th or so. And, within 2 weeks or 3 weeks of that, essentially all in on the construction contract is when we put a halt to initiating any further construction. And so that contract, just by sheer timing, proceeded into construction. And over this weekend, they'll be erecting a tower crane to actually go above ground with that garage. We pretty much received all our permits. We expect a final building permit by the end of this coming week or so. And I know, city staff can speak to the collaboration we had done on the Sumner procurement, which was about to begin about that same time as well. And had we initiated that, that too would be in a different situation.
When is it projected to be finished?
Puyallup Garage is projected to be finished the first half of 2022.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. Go ahead, Charlotte.
Thanks. I was just wondering if the board will be taking public comment when they start making decisions on how they realign their projects.
Yes. As I said, the board is talking this month about what kind of engagement they want to have us perform, to help them gather public feedback. So it's not entirely clear yet what the details of that will look like, but we're anticipating some activity in April and May. And of course, all of the board meetings where they're talking about this are open to the public, and they are taking public comment on this issue at all of those meetings.
Thank you.
And I would just like to add that as that public comment opportunity, as that information and details become available, we'll make sure to share that with city staff and with you, mayor and council, directly. So you have that information. We really appreciate the city's help of helping spread the word throughout the Sumner community and Wood for this as well. And we also appreciate the comments that the mayor and council have submitted to the board throughout this process since it's began through letters and emails. We have received those, and those have been sent to the board, and we will continue to send any of those along.
Thanks, Austin.
Trying to catch up. Okay. Any other council member comments or questions for Sound Transit staff? Okay. I appreciate your clarity in terms of, I was trying to figure out where the money was coming from, and basically, and because obviously ridership has gone down, so I was like, how does that affect the overall revenue picture? And looking at your pie chart, that helped, because really that's a smaller portion of your revenue, compared to other things like taxes. And frankly, if you're like Sumner is, and most agencies that I've seen, the projections of sales tax and property tax and all those into the future is actually, I think, going to be better than what we originally thought when we went into the pandemic. So hopefully that will be, when you get that information back from your consultant, that will be good information. It's a little frustrating as a local elected official here to see the melding of what was approved in Sound Transit, 2 versus 3, because I get the sense, and this is based on no information at all, that there have been significant cost increases associated with the ST3 projects. And I understand the acquisition part of it and the increases and the hot construction market that has just been a bugger, to navigate. But I sense that the increases on 3 in terms of cost overruns and expansions and everything has been much more significant than 2. And that is just a feeling, and if you'd like to comment it, that's fine. Or you could leave it just as as a statement. But that's the feeling I get. And so it ends up me feeling that Sumner's getting sort of short sheeted on the thing. And although I do appreciate you putting in there as one of the main criteria, or the board, the length of time that we've been waiting, for a garage, but it's one of many factors that the board has to consider. And I would just hope that it would be a significant factor that would be that they would take under consideration. And I'm looking forward to the information that comes out from your process, and I can guarantee you we will comment it. The council's information, I already sent a letter off to the Pierce County members of the Sound Transit Board, urging them to consider the Sumner station, and we'll continue doing that as we get that information back from you. I don't envy you in your process and where you're at, because you have a bunch of people out there, wanting you to do magic things and make everything all okay. And that is a tough position to be in. But I appreciate you coming in, talking to us, and sharing that, and look forward again, like I said, to more information coming to us in the future. Anybody else? Any final comments? Jason, you got anything?
Nope, nothing from me, Mayor.
Okay. Well, thank you all, 3 of you, for sharing the news, and I wish you well, and just come out with all the magic answers to make everybody happy, and you guys will have done your job. It's just as easy as that. Anyway, I wish you well, and have a nice evening.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you
so
very much, Mayor and council members and staff. We will be sure to keep you apprised when those public comment opportunities and more information is available. We'll send those updates as soon as we can.
Okay. Thank you very much, Austin, Matt, John. Have a nice evening, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a great evening, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye. Okay. With that uplifting session, we will now move into item number 2, which is the 2022 to 27 6-year Transportation Improvement Program Annual Update. That's a long title, basically a 6-year TIP. And Jason, you're going to start this off again?
Sure.
Okay.
I think this is uplifting because we get to talk about all the fun projects that Public Works is working on and actually making progress on. So I'll turn this over to Associate Engineer Michael Kosa.
Hi, everybody. And as I think I usually say right before I start this, I'm, associate city engineer and primarily focused on transportation and stormwater. But I could talk about this as long as everybody wants me to. And I have in the past, and I'm happy to indulge you or have you indulge me as much as possible. So what I'll do though,
we'll try not to indulge each other too much here.
Okay, that sounds, I don't know. I think it's dinner time, so I'm thinking about food, but that's all right. I will give kind of a brief overview and go into it as much as anybody would like to question or talk through. But in your packet, you should have seen the map that I have up. Everybody can see the map? Yes, good. It's a little small, I know, but I'm just going to kind of go through a few of the items and really focus on our priorities and talk about whatever you might be interested in talking about. But as you know, we have our transportation improvement programs laid out in a priority order that just kind of lays out arterials, collector routes, and trails that we are looking at and have identified as important projects for the city and are looking to move forward on. Places we have funding, other places we don't. Sometimes we have some funding, but not all of it. So we'll be working through that as time goes on. But this list is very important for especially grant funding opportunities, so that we all have an adopted list of projects that are important to the city and can be funded more easily, planned for. And so we are able to move forward with them. So without further ado, just wanted to talk, probably one of the more interesting things was our prioritization at the top of the list. And we've been looking at a couple projects that have kind of bounced back and forth. And right now, our Stewart Road Bridge project, we have recommended to prioritize at the top of the list. And like I said, any of these projects are important, and they're all important in many ways. But with all the funding that was acquired for that project last year, we kicked off final design last week. Our final design should be complete by the end of 2022, and we'll be looking at we're working through right-of-way acquisitions as well this year. So we'll be ready by basically the end of 22 into 23 to have the potential to start construction. We still have a funding gap of about $12 million. We have some mechanisms and programs we want to apply for, but we have $13 million in hand. So we're just over 50% funded for that project. And that doesn't count any of the potential for city funds that's outside grants that have funded that project to date. So figuring out the funding plan will be important as we move forward, and continuing to apply for grants to try to make that a smaller gap to complete construction.
Mr. Kosa, that particular project, I know you've done extremely well on your grants and stuff, but as I recall, some of those grants do have some time limitations, or the monies that we receive, for instance, from Pierce County, have some time limitations. So if we're not successful in moving it forward in a timely manner, we stand to jeopardize those funds and actually go backwards. Is that correct?
Yeah. If you're thinking for Cinderella here, you start turning into a pumpkin mid 2024 is when some of those funds start to either expire or we've been looking for extensions. Beyond that, some of the Pierce County funds are needed to be obligated for construction by 2024, end of 2024. So we have a number of deadlines that are 2024 focused. We're trying to get our design done by 22 so that we have some wiggle room and we see what sort of funding opportunities that we might be able to finish the project out from a funding perspective. So,
okay. Yeah, and mine was more the point as to why you have it up as like number one, A1.
Yep.
Is because of potential loss of those dollars. Anyway, that was it. Thank you, Michael.
Yep, no problem. So A1 and A2 kind of have bounced back and forth over the years here, but we have A2 as the 166 widening project. That project is in preliminary design. We've been working very closely with WashDOT. We have some preliminary conceptual approvals. We're looking at a preliminary design approval this year and moving into final design on that in 22. We have the funding in place for design, but right of way and construction still need assistance to get, we don't have funding secured for those types of activities. So right now, we know there's a lot of design work. There's a culvert underneath the intersection at Sumner Taps and 64th. That needs to be, it's a fish passage culvert installed. So we're working through that. Funding that is on our storm CIP. So there is definitely a lot of moving pieces to the puzzle down there, and we're making progress on them.
Okay, Michael, just a second. Patrick has a question. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, just quick question is at what point, because I know it's been talked about before of maybe trying to take lead on that interchange like we did on Traffic Ave. At what point does that come into play on the design process? Or is
So
that once the design is completed?
for the most part, we've taken most of the lead on it. We're working closely with WashDOT, but in terms of if we waited for WashDOT, we wouldn't be able to move forward. It's just not their highest priority. And it really is one of our highest priorities.
That's exactly where I was going with it is it would probably move much faster snail pace with us being able to take it and find funding versus WashDOT.
And between that and the complexity of the fish passage culvert that is needed underneath that intersection, it really complicates that. It's a very complex little project, smaller footprint, but really there's a lot going on there. So that's why we're focused on it, but it does take quite a bit of time to get through and talk through all of the needs between, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to the tribes to get all of the coordination that's needed in order to get the fish passage culvert in, which is one of the first things that has to happen before you can build a road on top of it. So we're working through that right now with KPG. They've been very helpful.
Thank you.
Yep. Our A3 is our Main and Wood project, and that one I know is close to everybody. Everybody knows a lot about that and our signalization. Right now we're at a 90% level for design, and our target is to be out to construction in early 2022. So we're in right-of-way acquisition mode, but we are well on pace to get that to be able to go out to advertise in basically January of 22. We'd like to get out, get it in, over and done with before kind of the summertime when a lot of those businesses are really in need of not having construction happening in front of their establishments. A4 is it's kind of a combination project that we have federal funding for. There's as part of a safety grant, we were awarded funds for a citywide signal backplate program. So putting if you've seen like the reflective back plates on all those signals, some of the newer signals have them, the older ones don't, but they're very helpful, particularly when we have a power outage. You are able to see that there is a signal there if the signal's dark. That's retro-reflective material behind those, and it's a major safety very good, low cost, high value sort of project. So that combined with upgrading the pedestrian improvements at that specific location, which is at Traffic and Maple. So that there is currently a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, one of those push button operations for getting across Traffic Avenue, but it's just the funding that we received was for a pedestrian signal there that is more substantial with a big arm that goes over and everything. So mostly paid for by the federal grant. A5 is another interesting piece of the puzzle. We talked about the Stewart Road project, but A5 is adjacent to that, outside of our city limits, but just barely. The city of Pacific is working on a project right now, and they I think have awarded construction or are about to award construction. It's a widening of Stewart Road between Valentine and Butte Avenue, and then putting a new signal at Butte. It goes over the railroad tracks. That's a 2-lane section. They're opening up to 4 lanes, similar to what we're going to be doing at the bridge. So we've been working very closely with them, and we have added this as an item because of they were short on funding, and we were able to secure some state funding for the project as well. So it's being added to our transportation program so that we can help fund their project with some state funds. So very happy about that. But that project is currently about to go under construction and should be done hopefully early 22, if not a little bit later in the summer. So that's A5. A6 is mostly sidewalk related, but the sidewalks along 160th. Part of that project is between wrong button. Let's try that again. Between the YMCA and Main Street, there's a missing sidewalk, and we will be getting that installed hopefully this year. It should be this summer, is scheduled for this summer. But working at getting that done, that's part of an ecology grant. There's also some sidewalk that could be installed on the west side of the intersection as well. Moving on to A7, we have intersection improvements, mostly a planning exercise, but we've identified Puyallup and Tacoma as an intersection that may need some upgrades from the 3-way stop controlled intersection. A8 is a reference to the Gateway program and our $500,000 contribution that was part of a package a couple of years ago when WashDOT came by to help fund that mega project of extending 167 all the way to I-5. So we added that to our program here because we are funding that. Next, we have a couple projects along 167. A9 is an A9 and A10 are an additional lane on 167. We're not funding any of that, but that's a WashDOT project inside of our city limits, so we've added that to our program here. If nothing else to be aware, A9 is actually was going out for ad and will be out for construction starting this summer. It runs through 2022. So those northbound lanes will be, or a northbound lane will be added between SR 410 and connect all the way up to Auburn, where the 3rd lane is, HOV lane is up there. The southbound lanes are a bit more difficult. There's the northbound lanes, just mostly pavement, a little bit of widening and some shoulder work. The southbound, they're getting to bridge work. So that's why A10 is a bit further off in terms of the time frame, but WashDOT is funded, has A9 all funded, and they are moving forward on that project. We have a couple closures, or there'll be a lot of traffic impact over the summer as they do that work. And then there is one weekend of a closure of northbound 167. That will be an interesting detour coming up this summer. A11, we are looking at having a resurfacing project on our in our plan, and that one is Valley Avenue from Main Street to just south of Gary Street, piece of the city that is in need of some roadway preservation. We've done some crack sealing, but it really needs a full resurfacing, which would be a mill and overlay sort of option. Likely we'll be applying for federal funding to try to get that get that done with some federal funds. A12 is looking at the intersection at 60th and Sumner Taps. This aligns with the East Sumner neighborhood plan that's currently in draft and finalizing. But looking at that intersection and saying that needs to have an upgrade due to additional increased activity, and looking at putting in possibly a signal there. We're kind of in a planning phase for what that looks like, but knowing that there probably will have to be some changes there. Originally, we had 62nd that was going to be built, and that's been removed. So there's really only 2 access points for Sumner Taps Highway to access the city, which is 64th and then 60th. So making sure that those 60th is a full intersection would likely be a benefit to everybody. Looking at some signal work there. To try to benefit some of the grading and difficulty in the curve there, and speeds. A13 and A14 are both WashDOT projects. They're more long-term, looking at upgrading the interchange at 60 at SR 410 and the off ramps there at Valley Avenue, and then also a widening for A14 there. Those are pretty out there. They were part of a planning study that WashDOT did. I haven't seen funding for either of those pop up in the last year, but it's still on the radar to be done. All within WashDOT purview, and mostly not in city of Sumner limits. So we don't have a lot to say other than it's a very important area, very close to our city boundary, and a lot of people use it. And then at A15, we're looking at evaluating the 60th and so it's Main Street and 160th, and whether or not there needs to be some improvements there for the intersection, as once again with the East Sumner neighborhood growing, that being a potential for eventual signal there or something, but it's not risen to that level yet. But continuing to plan for that. I also added one more in the past week that you haven't seen. It's up here at A16. We're looking at, we're completing our ITS citywide strategic plan, and most likely there will be a need for a corridor-wide improvement. There's on Stewart Road corridor, particularly after everything is complete, making sure the signals are all connected into each other and are able to communicate. If you have that, you can usually increase your throughput of traffic volume by 10 to 15% just by having everything talk to each other. So we'd be looking at putting that in for a grant application as well. Really crosses a number of jurisdictions. WashDOT signals, City Pacific signals, Auburn signals, and Sumner signals. So that's a little of an overview of the arterial projects, the kind of bigger arterials. Pause for any questions right now.
Any questions on what Michael has covered to date with the arterial street projects? Looks like I'm getting a bunch of heads and they're shaking in the no direction. So that means that you have no questions so far. Maybe when we get to the C's, Michael, I don't know how much is carried over from prior years in terms of, in other words, they're projects that the council has sort of already looked at and said, yeah, this is great versus maybe what has changed from prior years. Anyway, it's up to the council. If they want to go through each one, I'm more than willing to do that too, but
I'll be a bit briefer on them just because they're a little smaller.
Okay.
C1 is the Academy Street Bike Lanes project. And I think we all know a little bit about that. There will be some correspondence coming. We've been working through conceptual design there. So you'll be seeing that in the next month or so, I'm guessing. C2, C3, C4, and C5 are legacy. That a lot of looking at improving those main collector roads, as well as C6, which is looking at improving the railroad crossing at Zender. The changes really are in C7, C8, and C9. Those are once again attached to the East Sumner neighborhood plan, and so there's tie-ins there to match what's being shown on that. So those are the quick ones on collector roads. And then I'll move on to trails really quick.
See if there's any questions that the council has on the collector system, and any up there that has a C on it. If you have a question about it, now's the time to ask Michael. Okay, seeing none, go ahead, Michael.
So moving on, we'll look at the T's, which are for trails. T1 is our Friar Avenue Trail. Probably the best news on that was we got some funding for that right-of-way acquisition phase. So we have design and right-of-way funds for that project. There will probably be an upcoming, you'll be hearing about Friar Avenue Trail to look at finishing up the design phase in the next month or so. With a budget amendment proposed for that. The construction of that is not yet funded, but looking at getting the purchases done, and it seems like people keep on coming in and wanting to build parts of it. So the scope gets smaller and smaller every time, it seems like, which is great. Moving on, we have T2 up here, which is our connection through the White River restoration project and realigning the trail. That'll be done as part of that. T3, which is down in here, is our River Grove pedestrian bridge. That's in design right now. In kind of the early conceptual phases of that, we're about to start engaging with WashDOT. We've been looking at a few options for best connections and most cost-effective connections. Which way the bridge would be aligned and that sort of thing. T4 and T5 are legacy. They are not on the books really, but looking at some sort of crossing across the White River or across the Puyallup River. And then T6 is another legacy of Colin Keck Trail connection, and that will be involved with the golf course and the golf course development. And that's an overview of what we have planned for the next 6 years if all the funding fell out of the sky. But we also, it's the wish list, and that's a great thing. So.
But Michael, you have to, if you want to go for grant funding, et cetera, you got to have it on your 6-year TIP. And so, there's a method to the madness here when you put it all down here and you say that it's out to the future and this and that. It's a necessary thing.
Mm-hmm. If you don't plan for it, you really can't get funding for it. It's key for trying to secure funds for any project, really. So
right,
it's great to update it yearly, and we're required to. So
okay. Before you continue, we have Patrick Reed has his hand raised. Go ahead, Patrick.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment. It's a great list. I love getting these updates every year of kind of where we're at and where things have shifted. And I preach frequently about how great our staff has been at not only prioritizing the projects, but doing it in ways that maximize the the funding and grant abilities. And that's, I think, envied by many other jurisdictions that we do so well with that. And it all comes down to the staff doing the preparation and execution on it.
Patrick, you hit it right on the head on that one. You know, it's easy to put together a 6-year plan, add the projects down here. It's a whole different thing is to be able to actually get them constructed and funded. And staff has truly done an outstanding job. I don't know of many other agencies that would take on, for instance, a traffic avenue interchange, you know, and be successful in getting it done and completed, you know, or doing the work they've done up in Stewart Bridge. I mean, they've got one of the larger grants coming out of PSRC. And it's because of some very good work on behalf of staff. So well stated. Thank you for recognizing that. Okay, other council members? The council members that have questions or comments? Questions or comments? Go ahead, Barb.
So the Sumner Taps Highway isn't on here because it's already going to happen? You know,
Yeah, so yeah, everything on here is 2022 through 2027. That was on before, and now it's on going to be dropped off because it will be complete by the end of 2021. And I didn't mention it, but we do have a, you know, can you see the handy dandy spreadsheet there? Yes, yeah, it's small, but we do have a number of, oops, darn. Let's try to zoom without making everybody squint. We do have a list, and this is in your packet as well. We have our spreadsheet of the projects that we're completing this year. The Summer Taps projects, the
okay, there it is.
a portion of that sidewalk, like I said, the Main Street to YMCA portion. The other portions we're still having on our plan for so that they grant opportunities, that sort of thing. We also, just to talk about the other items, we just are finishing up the temporary curb bulbs on Main Street. That kind of started last year around Sumner High School. There's also going to be a new crosswalk with the pedestrian activated button at Main Street and Meeker Avenue. That's already been purchased. I think it's sitting at the shops. They're just getting around to the time we do that, and they're working on those curb bulbs first. We also talked about the ITS strategic plan. That is going to be a planning document we're going to prepare this year with a consultant. The other item of interest is we're going to look at 142nd Avenue and do a signal study that goes up and down the entire corridor through our manufacturing industrial center, and try to figure out what sort of control we should have on those different intersections. Is there ones that are in need of a light, a signal, or what should we be doing in those places as you know, in the industrial area has blossomed, and figure out where those needs are. You know, there's also the new public works building, and we want to make sure we account for that if there's a need for a signal, or determine what that needs to look like there in terms of traffic volumes. And then the sidewalk upgrades project, which there is a large amount of sidewalk work that is planned for this summer as well. So doing a lot of work, especially right near you know, the Sounder station, and looking at funds that were committed by Sound Transit to those sidewalk and pedestrian access upgrades.
So basically, we have a lot of stuff going on this year that you're going to have completed that don't carry on into the next year, 2022. So that's, I think, the short and sweet answer is that Sumner Taps is one of those that they'll complete, and so that's why it doesn't show up.
Okay. And can you explain to me the temporary curb bulbs? I mean, I've run into them, so.
Well, hopefully you haven't run into them.
Well, I mean, you have to work hard to get around them sometimes, but why are they temporary? They look kind of permanent to me. So
So it was part of a grant that we applied for. It's a TIB Complete Streets grant. And this was a bit of a, it was a bit of an experiment. We knew that we were going to need better pedestrian access around the school. And this year has been kind of an odd one, but we knew that we wanted to try to benefit the pedestrians, the students and faculty and people that use the crosswalks that go across Main Street. They're very long, and we have a lot of folks that have trouble parking far enough away from those crosswalks. Sometimes they park in the crosswalk, sometimes they park close to the crosswalk, and causing sight issues when somebody is about to start to walk into a crosswalk. There's a parked car, and they're not very visible to somebody driving down Main Street. So those islands that we're putting out there are basically temporary curb bulbs. They were done at relative cost, rather than doing a full curb bulbs that would be a lot more money to do. These kind of get the point across, and they ensure that people don't park and too close to those existing crosswalks, and keep those areas clear so that there's no visibility issues. They're also going to house 2 of our activated push button crosswalk signs with the blinky things, and those will help. It allows us to get the flashing thing a little bit further out into traffic, closer to traffic, so that you're aware that you really need to be. If you look at the signs right now, they're very far back, and so we were trying to get that more into that that view of the motorist. So we're excited about that project, and we also know that with this the school coming in a few years, as they're getting to their multiple phase development, some of those improvements will be completed or made permanent by the school district, especially, but they also didn't have their plan entirely completed. And so looking at what pedestrians will be looking at in the future, it gives us a lot of flexibility. Sorry, I told you I could talk all night.
I was going to say, basically, what you've done, Michael, is that you've taken and you've addressed a safety concern and issue out there with a reduced amount of money, because that's what you can do right now because you don't have full funding for it.
Right. I mean, it was a way that we could affect change with less than $50,000 worth of effort.
That's why I said cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay,
at least.
Barb, anything more?
No, I understand what's going on, but thanks for the explanation.
Okay, go ahead, Kathy.
So does that mean they're going to go away? They're just there for like temporary training pants kind of thing? They'll go away, or they will be made into permanent later?
I don't anticipate them going away. I think as the school builds, especially on their frontage, they will replace some of that with permanent curb extension bulb outs. At which point we probably will salvage the curbs that we have out there and possibly look at other places that we could try to use them to do similar activities. But I wouldn't say they're temporary. They probably are temporary to the point where we say, well, this is working great, let's make it permanent. And how are we going to fund that?
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Okay. Other questions or comments, council members? Questions or comments? Okay. Hey, you're off the hook. This comes before the council when?
This will be before the council next week. And then that will be for public hearing. And then we will be coming back at the beginning of April, unfinished business for adoption.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. Nice work.
And if you have comments, in the
Go ahead,
if
sir.
anything comes up in the meantime, sorry, if anything comes up, feel free to contact me. We can.
Don't worry, they're not hesitant, Michael. They'll get a hold of you if anything comes up. But anyway, nice job covering it, and you guys have a lot again going on, you know, for the small number that you are. So again, thank you very much. Good work.
Thank you.
Okay, we got at least one thumbs up from Kurt there. That's good. Oh, 2 thumbs up. It's even better. Okay, it takes us on to item number 3, which is Police Department body worn camera discussion. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. One of the police department's goals for 2021 was to continually examine body worn cameras and determine whether or not it'd be appropriate for our organization. In light of everything going on in the world today, I asked the chief to accelerate that and get before council sooner rather than later to discuss a possible adoption of a body worn camera program. So that's what we're here to do tonight. We are looking for some direction from council tonight, not just a one-sided discussion. So at the end of this, the chief and I will be looking to you for some direction on a preference on which way to go on this important topic. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chief.
Okay, Chief, you're doing really well. You just have to unmute yourself.
I apologize for that. Good evening, mayors, council, staff. As Jason introduced, we want to have just an informal conversation tonight about body worn cameras. What are they? How do they work? What do they cost? And with the goal at the end of tonight's presentation, get some direction from staff on how to proceed. Body cameras have, of course, been in the media quite a bit due to recent events, and by and large have been incorporated in a lot of larger jurisdictions. But in a nutshell, I wanted just to quickly go over really how they work. As you can see, they're a high resolution or high definition camera device, typically worn on the chest of the officer. It records both audio and visual. It's easily activated by the officer with the touch of a button or through certain built-in control automatic triggers. And it's really used by law enforcement to record their interaction and engagement with the public, and also to gather evidence at scenes of crimes. It's worn by the officer in the field. It's wireless. It's self-sufficient, battery operated, and it's recorded anytime the officer has those engagements or interaction with the public. And then at least once a shift, it's typically downloaded into a cloud-based storage. All the vendors have their own version of video management, but they're all typically cloud-based. And what that enables is access by a number of potential end users. The most common or frequent is going to be the prosecution and defense in criminal cases where the officer is engaged in an arrest, subsequently is prosecuted and defended. And also for the police, for their internal review of complaints, for purposes of improving training or policy development, and also to the public through limited public disclosure requests. And those can be redacted, managed, stored, retained per the state archivist retention schedule and everything through that cloud-based software. So then the next question, really, now we know what it is, why would we want to invest in a body-worn camera program here in Sumner? And as Jason alluded to, trust is the major key to achieving our mission with the public. Both our mission of making Sumner a place where people can live safely and without fear, but also our department vision of setting the standard of excellence for a progressive small city police department. And transparency is that foundation of that trust. And the public's expectation that police actions are being recorded is increasing. And In fact, some communities, as we've seen, like in Tacoma, or sections of communities, have outright demanded it, that police record these interactions for transparency. And the other fact of the matter is that really everyone has a digital high definition camera at their disposal. Police officers, when they're engaged in their activity, they don't have the ability to pull out their phone, their department issued cell phone, and start recording. But other observers and individuals will, and they're increasingly sharing it with social media and with traditional media outlets. And the fact is, if we don't have our own video from that officer's perspective, from mid-center on their chest, looking forward in a two-dimensional 180 degrees, how are we going to rebut the public's, video that's out there from a bystander that's standing off 90-degree angle or passing by in a vehicle? How it makes it increasingly difficult for us to rebut other video or to be able to defend the officer's legitimate actions. And so that puts the officer and the city at a disadvantage. And then as body cam, more departments start to implement it, technology increases substantially from when programs first launched. Studies have shown that the use of body camera and police-citizen interaction has led to significant decrease in both civilian complaints against officers and in officer use of force rates. And some would say, oh, well, see, they were using too much force, but now that they're being watched, they don't use it. Actually, citizens comply more when they know they're being recorded and watched. And so the need for officers to use force has decreased. And also similar studies have found that it aids in the criminal prosecution of certain types of cases. And some suggest 20% increase in the way of guilty pleas where video evidence was available to the prosecution. And really the goal, again, when we talk about the trust between the public and law enforcement, and transparency is a key to that trust, is increasing our transparency and the ability to protect and defend officers from false claims and the city in potential litigation. Only takes one significant incident, I think, as Tacoma can speak to, in early January, the value of having good video evidence. So what are the costs? Well, first I'll stop there. Is any questions about body cams or how they work? We'll get into cost and some of the challenges here in a second.
Council members, questions for the chief? Go ahead, Patrick.
So I have a question, but I'm not sure if this is the right time for it. Maybe it is, because I know on the third bullet, you mentioned how more and more videos or accusations are being made against officers, and that this is an opportunity for the officer to set the record straight, for example, when it's appropriate. I've seen more and more jurisdictions being even very quick to release body cam footage after an incident where an accusation is made about the interaction, and the camera video has been released quickly to clarify, firsthand, so to speak,
yep,
what actually took place when there's a discrepancy in the accusation. Is that kind of the same thinking that if we went with them, is that something we would also employ as a strategy when accusations or claims are being made?
Well, that kind of speaks to the policy surrounding the use of body cameras. And we'll get to that actually in an upcoming slide, because council needs to authorize it and the public needs to have some input on the policy determination or how the body cam is used, as well as the guild. So we'll get into what's the cost. So you have your upfront.
Chief, just a second. I'm going to call on Charlotte. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have, I think, one question about how it works. You mentioned that officers turn it on with a touch of a button. Is there a way, automatically, is there a way to get them so that they automatically turn on per interaction? Like, I'm wondering what happens when the officer forgets and then potentially adds like a certain level of skepticism about whether it was intentional not to turn it on during an interaction, or is it something where it's really just going to have to rely on training and repetitiveness
Yes.
to be cleared?
Unfortunately, like I said, technology is advancing to the point where there's are certain triggers, like turning the lights on in the patrol car would automatically trigger the activation of the camera. They have some technology through Bluetooth where if they draw their weapon from their holster, it automatically triggers. Same with the taser device. But unfortunately, one, that's expensive, and two, that's so little of our engagements. So the traffic stop, well, that would involve the lights, but otherwise it's going to require the officer to activate it.
Okay, then as a department, would your policy be that they try and remember to turn it on, like for every interaction, like including stopping by on the streets? Like I've seen some officers do like a great job of checking up on someone to make sure they're okay. Would it include, like, would the policy be for like all interactions?
Never all and never always, or never say never and never say always. So the goal is to have it consistently record interactions with citizens, but there are situations where there's exceptions where they would be expected not to record. So if they're interviewing a victim of a very sensitive crime, if they're doing a death investigation where persons, so there's certain things where you respect the dignity and people's privacy. The state law, certain places can't be recorded in treatment facilities and different things. So there's parameters, but the goal, of course, is to, be consistent and record interactions with citizens, but there's got to be exceptions and there's got to be some level of discretion.
Okay, and then how have departments been dealing with the difference between privacy and public records requests for video footage?
So there's a number of exemptions in the public disclosure law. Like I said, I mentioned certain places where they can't be filmed. So those things are not subject to disclosure or they're subject to redaction. So between the protections built in for victims and for privacy expectations in the public disclosure laws itself, as well as other policy on whether or not you record or not in certain situations. Both of those in tandem are designed to protect victims and certain privacy expectations.
Okay, and then after we get through this, if the council does end up moving forward or approving this, can we get like an update in a year to find out how it worked out? Like, any issues that you may have encountered that we didn't anticipate, or?
Sure, and we'll get into next steps here in just a second. Is there any other questions, Mayor?
Chief, would you mind just speaking real quickly to some of the technology improvements that have happened lately with body worn cameras? I mean, just because the officer may initially forget to turn it on, I mean, police work is very dynamic. Things happen very rapidly and unknown predictability. Can you speak a little bit to the technology built into the camera that has some pre-event recordings?
So when the camera is activated, it buffers back 30 seconds before it's activated to capture ideally what it was that led to the contact, right? So the observed traffic stop, the citizen approaching them. So it does capture back because it's constantly, like all video, whether it's at your home or anything else, it's constantly running, but not constantly recording. So it captures back 30 seconds. Is that what you're referring to, Jason? Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to, maybe answer Councilmember Newman's concern that, our goal is to record every interaction, but, because police work is dynamic and things happen very quickly, there are some other technology solutions that help capture as much as we can.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's good to know too. Thanks.
Okay, so into the costs. So you've got your upfront kind of vendor costs. I initially, along with requested two cost estimates from two vendors, and the initial costs appear to be somewhere in the range of $140,000 to $170,000 over a 5-year contract. Some of the variable in that cost is going to be the number of add-on features, like I talked about, the triggers, and really significant cost is the cloud storage, as the ongoing cost. The camera technology itself is fairly inexpensive. There's no software or hardware or servers or anything we maintain because it's all cloud-based. So really, they're charging for the service of the cloud storage, redaction, and all their software to manage the video technology, and that's pretty consistent on how most vendors run their programs. Is really over what they call TAP, is Technology Assurance Program, where goes over a 5-year period of time. In the midpoint, it refreshes. You get new cameras, you get new docking stations, stuff, so that technology is always the most up to date. And so what you're paying for, again, is that online cloud storage licenses, and then there's a number of interface with our CAD system, a lot of interfaces to make the technology be easily tracked, retrieved, traceable. So a lot of costs there. One thing,
Chief,
yeah.
just a second before we continue. Kathy has a question. Go ahead. Kathy, you're muted.
Sorry about that. This is for all of the cameras, and does every police officer have his own specific camera that is only his, or do they share cameras?
So the quote is based off of 18 cameras with all the associated storage licenses and everything. And the idea is that every individual would have their own camera, just like they have their own gun, just like they have their own portable radio, and not just have a bank. It's kind of like take-home cars, right? Instead of you show up to work and you grab an available car, that it's a lot cleaner to maintain that way than have to, because the camera is programmed with their identifier. It also works in conjunction with our CAD, our computer-aided dispatch. So when badge 137, our newest officer, Perez, he's dispatched, the electronic, everything is synced together. The call he's assigned to, his portable camera is coded with his identification. So, and then it's easier to store by incident, by officer, by date, by time. We could, in concept, have a bank of cameras that an officer comes to work and has to grab one. But then you run into all kinds of logistic issues with having them properly charged, the time it takes to download them between shifts. And there's just not that overlap between the two shifts. So this package everybody would have a camera.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Let me clarify, all uniformed officers, commissioned officers would have a camera. So that's our patrol officers, supervisors, our community service officer, but not myself, deputy chief, or the 2 plainclothes detectives.
And this estimate is for all of the cameras, not just each one, right?
No, correct. The whole package.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, Chief, before you continue, Patrick, go ahead.
Quick question is, I know officers across the board are mixed, whether they're in favor or not of them, but does it create a bargaining challenge that needs to be addressed in order
You're
to?
getting ahead of yourself here. Chief's going to be getting into that one too.
Yep. So those are that comes into the challenges. So the first thing is the hard cost, buying the equipment, getting under contract then there's the soft cost or the indirect costs, and that's going to largely be in staff time to implement this thing. Not only the information technology requirements, but also the public disclosure requirements. And we put in here for an example, if we did need an FTE to manage all that, you can figure with salary and benefits all in cost, figure an additional 125 a year. But that's one of the challenges because we don't know, not having had a program. Back in the day, we did have some in-car camera. It was older technology. I don't think we had a tremendous amount of requests, but we phased that as technology, as we replaced vehicles. So we don't know exactly what the staffing impacts are going to be. We are exploring ways that we can use some of our existing staffing. One of the things that I found out with one of the vendors is they provide free licensing, in other words, access to their cloud servers for public defenders, prosecutors, and a certain number of admin licenses. So that would enable prosecutors, either it's city staff or I'm learning the county is doing it the same exact way, to go in directly to the cloud and access video evidence in their criminal prosecution cases. So we are looking at different ways to handle both our needs internally and for our external partners like prosecutors. And then to answer Patrick's question, it's a change of working conditions, so it does require bargaining. As you know, the city's currently in negotiations with Sumner Police Officers or Sumner Police Guild. So that's another kind of timeliness of getting direction from council on how to proceed. We did do a survey in January. I asked us 3 questions. Do you support a body-worn program? Yes is self-explanatory. No, if no, why not? What are some of your concerns so I can start addressing those? And it was split down the middle, 50-50 in favor and 50% opposed. And for most of their reasons for being opposed can be answered in the careful drafting of policy. One of the other challenges is, as you know, from the current legislator, there's a lot of police reform initiatives being considered. And some of those don't have a funding source. So for example, the community oversight boards passed the House and went to the Senate. Initially would require any city that has 10 or more peace officers to have an external oversight board. And then the city would have to fund that board. There's been a number of amendments. It's last count was up to if you had 15 or more, but we still fall under that. So there could be some other legislative mandates or reform initiatives that could compete for possible funding with body cams. And one of the, several of us pontificated that there would be a bill in this current session, legislative mandating body cams. We haven't seen it this session, but it's really a question of, I think it'll eventually be required in some form or fashion, or it'll be tied to grant funding or some other mechanism. So it's a question for the council too, is you want to be ahead of the curve or behind it as far as adopting this technology. And if it does get mandated, is the cost going to go up? Right now, I think that there's enough major competitors out there that the prices are pretty good for this technology. And then, like Jason said, really the ask from council is there sufficient interest to move forward? This is a long process. I'll tell you, Tacoma just implemented their body-worn camera programs to 253 officers in January and February, but they've actually been planning and working on this since 2017 through their police advisory council, through work groups, through a very robust vendor selection process, through collective bargaining and field trials and demos. It was a long process, and which is kind of good for us because we can learn from that process and not have to go through the same pains as they did. But there are a lot of next steps that would be needed, and that's first priority be bargaining impacts with the guild, submitting a policy, proposed policy as part of that, getting updated quotes. Most quotes have a 90-day expiration. I don't foresee that that's going to change a whole lot. And then form a internal work group to assess the impacts and what our implementation strategy would be. So it's going to be all our internal partners in the city, IT, legal, police, and HR. And then the council plays a role in this too, because the state legislature requires that if localities adopt body worn camera, it needs to be done by ordinance or resolution, and requires some community involvement in the development of the operational policies. And then the last part, of course, would be the final contract, purchase, training, and implementation.
So other than that, Chief.
Yeah, piece of cake.
Okay. This is the part where you all weigh in on this thing as to maybe if you have additional questions or if you have thoughts in terms of whether we should or shouldn't move forward, because I think that was the underlying question that the chief has. Given everything that you've heard, okay, do we continue to move forward and address this issue? First one head up was Josh, then we'll go to Patrick. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think the benefits to me outweigh the challenges. I think between public trust and just the potential liability that you may be able to avoid with the cameras, for me, I think it's a good idea to continue to go down this road.
Okay, let's see. After that, I had Patrick, and then have Kathy, then Barb.
I'm a little to the off of center in favor of it. I think it's got a number of challenges that are going to be difficult to address, especially on the archival records and disclosure. I think those are going to be somewhat problematic to manage, but I do see an opportunity in a lot of ways to increase trust with the public and accountability. And that's a two-way street: accountability for the officers and accountability for the public. So I think there are benefits there. I also think it's a good idea. I like in the slide that the bullet talking about in the future. I do believe this is something that'll be mandated in the near future for all departments. I'm not sure how fast that will come, but I think the trend is definitely heading that direction. So how it finally looks, I don't know, but I am in favor of moving forward with it.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Go ahead, Kathy.
I agree, ahead of the curve.
Go ahead, Barb.
Yeah, I agree too, but I just wonder, have there been instances where you wish you had the body cam capabilities? Has there been any things that have happened here in the city where you wish that you'd had something to record?
I can't think of any. We've been very fortunate, and really, when you think about it, it's somewhat of a game of odds. Who's to say what the next interaction an officer has doesn't turn either deadly, or on one end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum, the citizen says, well, this officer is a so and so and did this or that, and then I need to refer to the video. But we've just been lucky. And I don't know, how long we want to test our luck.
Right.
And as every year I brief Public Safety Committee and the mayor on our use of force, our officer complaints, our accommodations, any trends in complaints or any racial bias policing indicia. And we have very, very good record to stand on. And I think the concern is more of having one more tool at our disposal to protect us as a city and our officers and their reputation. I think, you say one incident could pay for it.
Right, yeah. No, I just know that we have a pretty high level of trust by the community,
Yeah, we
so.
do. We're very,
Yeah.
very blessed. High level of trust in this council and the administration, the community. But it's almost like buying an insurance policy.
Right, yeah.
Patrick's earlier question, our policy would be to release body cam in a significant incident within 48 hours. And we pre-negotiate that with the union, so there's no misunderstanding that's no less or no more than. So it could be, that later that day or the next day, but no later than 48 hours.
Thank you.
Okay, before I go back to you, Patrick, I know you raised your hand. Other council members that haven't weighed in, go ahead, Cindy.
Yes, I trust our chief to take and research this, and so I would really like us to move forward on it.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Cindy. Let's see. I've gone down the list here. Go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, I think we should pursue it as well. Yes.
Okay. I've got most everybody there. Okay, Patrick, I'll go back to you. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on what Chief said on the 48 hours. I like that because one of the criticisms that I have seen with a lot of jurisdictions is how long it takes for them to get that footage out. And granted, there are reasons for that, especially if there's an active investigation, but having something built into policy, I like the direction of that.
Thanks, Patrick. Any council comments or questions? Council comments or questions? Seeing none, obviously a majority, strong majority of the council says to move forward with it. It's something I've been in favor of. When you talk about the whole transparency issue, the chief that you went over is that this is the ultimate, transparency. It's out there, and frankly, I'm concerned about what could happen in a case. Your examples of everybody has a high definition video recorder on them that can be perceived in a certain way, and to not have anything coming from an officer's side that shows what had happened, I think is a real mistake. I think you almost have to have that for the protection of our officers and for protection of the citizens too. And I don't know. We've been blessed so far. You're right, but it only takes one. And I wouldn't want that one to occur without us being able to be transparent and in terms of what happened and be able to provide defense from the city, if that's appropriate, or if it isn't, there's the other side of it to where you hold people accountable and hold officers accountable too. So it works both ways. I am a little concerned about what comes out of the legislative session this year, because you're right. You've outlined the costs for the body cams and the whole system, related to that. But there could be significant additional costs that come out from the legislature for if we have to have oversight and if we have to have any number of things that could come out, and that bothers me. But I think your first step looks like is moving into the collective bargaining, part of it, and you've got that direction from the council, so you can proceed in that manner. And we'll soon know, soon by what, another month or two, what comes out of the legislature, and we'll just have to deal with it. And then the good news is coming with the next report that we'll get into in terms of the council agenda. We may take some of that good news away depending on what comes out of the legislature. So anyway, so nice work, Chief, in terms of presenting the information and getting feedback from the council, and proceed forth, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, with that, we get into the final item in the regular business, and that's the financial 2020 year in review. Go ahead. I think that's Jason, you starting out? Okay.
You know what? The title says it all, Mayor. You get a perfect introduction. So Chief Financial Officer Raymond.
Yeah, I can stumble into most anything, so that'd be the first one. Go ahead, Cassandra.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So we are knee deep in 2020 financial statement preparation. So this is my opportunity to come before you and kind of give you a brief update on how we ended up the year from a financial standpoint. I always like to start off by talking about the various ways that we hold ourselves to some financial accountability. At the department level, we have a quarterly review with finance. Really, our evaluations are ongoing by the department directors and the budget managers. Everyone has access to our Munis software, and all of the information is transparent and right there. The nice thing about Munis is that while they're in the system, if they've got questions about specific transactions, anyone with the access can just drill right down to the invoice and see exactly what it is, which gives us a lot of transparency for making sure that everyone really has kind of a thumb on their budgets. We review quarterly. We actually review on a monthly basis with our Finance and Personnel Committee. One of the things that we review is our biggest revenue into our general fund, and that's our sales tax. And again, that is a regular reporting item at our Finance Committee. We go over what our most recent revenue collections were, what the trend looks like, and any kind of variances or discrepancies in those reports. Annually, and what we're getting ready for right now is our audit. This is performed by the state auditor. We are lucky enough to have 3 audits, and I actually say that with all honesty. We have our financial audit and our accountability audit, which are normal, but because we're so successful in getting grants for transportation and other projects, we're also subject to what's called a single audit. That's a federal, an audit of our federally funded grant participation. And I'm not lying when I say that we are lucky to have that audit. That means we're doing well with our grants. And then our budget is one of the biggest parts of our financial accountability. We adopt a biennial budget, amendments as necessary, along with a mid-biennial budget amendment and a final budget amendment. And I know for a lot of people, kind of the budget process stops when we adopt it. For finance, budget goes year round. It's a constant process. We're either reviewing it, we're reporting on it, or we're evaluating it. So it's kind of where we're at with our accountability. I'm sorry?
Sorry, and you wouldn't have it any other way.
You're right. We could not talk about 2020 financial status without talking about the COVID-19 pandemic. We started off 2020 with a lot of plans on how 2020 was going to go, and then Mother Nature stepped in and said, yeah, hold up, let's just step back. So the restrictions really began in March 2020, and they continue through present. With those restrictions comes economic uncertainties. For instance, we anticipated a steep sales tax revenue impact. That didn't materialize. We've seen other impacts that we didn't necessarily expect, like in the collections of our utility billing revenues. So it really is a balancing act to keep an eye on the impacts of this pandemic as we continue to work through. We did receive $455,400 in CARES Act funding that helped us offset a lot of unanticipated costs, such as PPE, enhanced cleaning and sanitization, facility adjustments to provide for distancing, staff costs. We had emergency sick leave and emergency FMLA cost. In addition, we were able to distribute over $123,000 to community members for restaurant assistance, rent, mortgage, and utility grants. One of the things that we did as the pandemic began to show us that this was not just going to be a 2 to 3 week thing, but it was going to be more extended, is we brought to council last June a budget amendment to recognize potential revenue and expenditure impacts from the pandemic. We reduced our sales tax and our motor vehicle excise tax forecast. We deferred 2 positions until 2021. That was our communications specialist as well as a police officer position. We deferred or even eliminated some studies that we had programmed professional services funding for, including some traffic studies and a fire pension study. We eliminated all of our in-person training and development for staff for 2020, with the exception of any certifications that were required under job descriptions. We limited our use of supplies to just be on hand except where it was critical. We eliminated all of our 2020 event funding, as well as several capital projects for 2020 were either eliminated or deferred, and that include volunteer sidewalks for that year, the council chambers remodel, which is being done this year, ADA improvements in the cemetery flag pavilion. So as we continued through 2020, we always had an eye on what was happening with the pandemic. And then as we closed out 2020, we started looking at, all right, after this year, how did everything end up? When we are evaluating the performance of a fund, really what we're looking at are several components. We're looking at how did the revenues and the expenditures compare against what we forecast? How did they change? What got accomplished? Did we stick to the work plan that was outlined in our budget document? And then really one of our overriding metrics is what has happened to fund balance. Is it what we expect? Fund balance is the excess of operating revenues over operating expenses. A negative fund balance is a deficit. We don't get to have those. And then council also has a policy of requiring reserves of 8% of our operating expenditures in our general fund. We've also got reserves set in our utility funds. And then 8% reserves plus anything unreserved is really what we're talking about when we talk about fund balance. Like I mentioned, we evaluate fund balance based on what we would expect that fund balance to do. There are several funds, for instance, capital funds and replacement funds, where we would expect to have a decrease. They're often anticipated because we save up money to do a certain project or to replace a piece of equipment, and then we spend down that money. And so we'll see a cycle of a fund balance increasing, and then we'll see that fund balance decrease. And that's really what we're looking for as part of that expected pattern of what happens to the fund balance of a fund. So that's really where I wanted to kind of focus time on tonight, was what happened with the fund balances of our city funds. In our general fund, our fund balance increased. We had the sale of the Red Apple property. We also had higher than forecast general fund revenues, including sales tax. That's the biggest driver. That's 40% of our general fund revenue forecast. And we had some conservative spending. Our departments were asked to hold the line, and they did so. Our general fund reserves, this was unchanged. We didn't have any activity in this fund. This is, if you remember, this fund has about $980,000 in it. This was set in place several years ago, and this is the fund that requires a council supermajority to access. So that remains untouched in 2020. Our building reserve fund increased, and that's just due to an annual transfer in from the general fund that council approves in our budget process. Our complete streets fund, our fund balance decreased, and that's exactly what I was talking about. We got in, we received $300,000 from the Transportation Improvement Board. We had a set work plan to do, including pedestrian amenities and pedestrian safety. We did that. So we saw the fund balance decrease as we executed that grant work plan. Our drug enforcement was relatively unchanged. That fund does not have a set revenue stream, and so really there's very little that's programmed as far as activity. Our tourism fund, the ending fund balance was relatively unchanged. We did see 2020 receipts in, those are tourism tax. It was less than we expected just because of the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then those receipts were offset by expenditures for the downtown sound project. And really that's exactly where we expected to end up for the tourism fund. Debt service is another fund where I like to see the fund balances decrease. That means we're paying off debt. And that's what happened in 2020. The fund balance decreased and we paid off the remaining outstanding debt on LID number 70. So we retired that several years early, which I'm thrilled about. Our LID guarantee fund, just a minor increase from investment interest. Our sidewalk fund had an increase in their fund balance. We'll see, especially in these capital funds, we'll see the fund balances really kind of cycle from increasing to decreasing based on the timing of capital projects. In the sidewalk fund, we had an annual transfer in from the general fund. But really what kind of gave us that increase was we got grant receipts in early 2020 that were from 2019 projects. So real estate excise tax, these are our REIT tax receipts. There was no expenditure in there, but we continue to get receipts from real estate excise transactions. And so that fund balance increased. Our LID development fund, this really is kind of a dormant fund right now. We didn't have any activity. The last time this was used was for 136th and Valentine. Parks and Trails capital, we saw the fund balance decrease and we used our accrued balances for budgeted capital projects, including Friar Ave Trail, as well as the Loyalty Park improvements. In the street capital fund, we saw that fund balance increase just modestly. That was from grant reimbursements received in 2020 from 2019 projects. There's a lot of projects that cycle through this fund. We had a presentation from Mr. Kosa earlier, and all those projects that deal with our streets, including State Route 410, Stewart Road Bridge, these are all cycling through this fund. So it really does have an incredible amount of activity through it. Our facilities capital fund had a slight decrease in the fund balance. And again, as a capital fund, we were using the balances for budgeted capital projects, including the operations facility for the Public Works Department. Water, sewer, and storm all had an increase in their fund balance, and this is in line with the expectations from the rate model as we continue to accrue funds for capital projects. I will say that in all of these funds, we're watching these closely because the collections of utility revenues are being impacted by COVID-19, and there's pending legislature that's working its way through the session right now that could further impact our ability to collect those receivables. So we are keeping a close eye on those. Utility bond reserves, this is another dormant account. There was no 2020 activity. We'll be using it again once we issue debt for the Public Works Operations Facility. We talked about stormwater. In cemetery operations, the fund balance decreased. Our expenditures were within the estimates. But again, COVID-19, impacted these revenues. We have much fewer families being able to offer services, and therefore, our charges for services has gone down significantly. This fund did require an additional subsidy at the end of 2020 from the general fund of an additional $100,000, and we are keeping an eye and doing some analytics on this fund to really take a look at really where its position is going into this next biennium. We had a modest increase in animal control. Animal control it's an enterprise fund. So really what it's designed to do is cover its costs. And so that's how our rates are set, and that's how we track that. So, and now we get into our internal service funds. These funds are really meant to, again, cover their costs. They cover their costs by not charging outside users, but by charging other city funds. So our unemployment insurance, that fund balance decreased for 2020. This is a funny fund. This one is only used when there are unemployment claims. The city is self-insured for unemployment. So unemployment claims are processed by Employment Security, but they're paid for just pay as you go by the city. Fleet operations, we had just a modest increase. Our revenues and expenditures were in line with the budget. Again, the internal service fund is just designed to recoup its costs from its users. Technology services absorbed a couple of unforeseen expenditures in 2020. So that fund balance decreased a little bit. That will be caught up in the next assessments that are calculated for that fund. Fleet replacement has an increase in line with our replacement model to fund future replacements. And it's, Mr. Steffens was pointing out earlier, it's a pattern in this fund where on the first year, So 2019, for this biennium, the 2019-2020 biennium, the first year we buy everything. We buy all the equipment that was budgeted for that biennium. So in 2019, that fund balance dropped. In 2020, that fund balance is building up again as we continue to collect replacement revenues for equipment. And so at the end of 2021, I'm sure we're going to see that fund, I would expect to see that fund balance drop again as we purchase budgeted equipment for this biennium. Cemetery endowment, this is a permanent fund. What that means is we collect revenues from lot sales to fund perpetual care in the event that the cemetery ever stopped operating. So this fund balance has increased. We will never see this fund balance decrease. Under statute, we are not permitted to use the principal of this fund for anything except for perpetual care. Two final funds are Alder Avenue remediation. Well, that just dropped like a stone. We sold the property, we transferred the trust funds, and this fund will actually be closed out at the end of 2020. And development impact fees. Development activity, we increased the fund balance in this fund. So overall, everything performed as expected. We had a mix of funds that either increased, decreased, or stayed the same. But we look at what we would expect to see in that fund, and everything really did occur as we would expect. And we just continue to be fiscally conservative in both our outlook and our activity, especially with the uncertainties right now coming in from the pandemic. Before I move on to the general fund, are there any questions about any of those specific funds?
Okay, anybody brave enough to ask a question? Okay, go ahead, Cassandra.
The general fund. So let's start with our dashboard at a glance. These are kind of an overall category of things that we are watching pretty much on a continual basis. It goes back to that the budget is never finished. We are constantly either preparing it, evaluating it, or reporting it. And so this is part of the evaluation and the reporting. Revenues versus expenditures were within our revised budget. Our sales tax revenue was above our projections. And we'll talk about that in a further slide. Property tax revenue, energy and communications tax, charges for goods and services, other revenues, and expenditures were all really in line with our projections or within the revised budget. So this slide is looking at the overall biennium. So this is 2019-2020. You can see we received 110% of our revised revenues, but we only expended 92% of our revised expenditures. This really is an ideal situation. We brought in more revenues than we ended up sending out in expenditures. And this is what results in an increase in the fund balance. But then when we look at just 2020, so the red bar is our adopted budget. The orange bar is our revised budget. And then the purple bar is our actuals. For 2020, we received 123% of our revenues. That's kind of an eye-opening, mind-boggling number. But then we look at, if we strip out the proceeds from the sale of the red apple, that was at a little over $2 million. That leaves us with $15.68 million in revenues for 2020. When we look at that over our revised budget, again, it's kind of eye-popping. But if we look at it compared to our adopted budget, what our initial forecasts were before the impact of the pandemic, we really are very, very close to what we initially had forecast for 2020. We had budgeted 15.67 and we collected 15.68. So notwithstanding the sale of the red apple. And then on our expenditures, we were very conservative. The departments were asked to really have a status quo budget coming into the budget process. And then as the pandemic hit, we're really asked to hold the line. And we can see that really was an effort by city staff, especially here in the general fund, which is our primary operating fund. This is where street operations, this is all of our administrative services, engineering, so law enforcement. So it's when you lay the numbers out, you can see that this did increase fund balance in 2020 in the general fund. When we take a look at some of the specific revenue sources, property tax is 24% of our general fund revenue. It's our most stable source. It really is. For the most part, property taxes are 100% collectible. We generally have no issues with arrears in property tax. And we can see here for tax year 2020, we levied 3.9 million and we collected 3.9 million. We collected about 75,000-8,000 over what we levied, and that really is just catching up on any potential delinquent collections that were still out there from the year prior. Our sales tax revenue, this is where the conversations get interesting. Sales tax makes up 40% of our general fund revenue. It's our largest revenue source, but it's also really our most volatile. It changes with the economy. It changes with the mix of businesses that are located within the city. One of the things that we do measure on a monthly basis is where our sales tax coming from. Our top 5 remitters in the city remit consistently about 1/3 of our overall sales tax receipts. That's always something that we're watching. The more diversity that we can have in our sales tax and makeup of who's remitting to the city, the stronger we are. We said with the top 5 remitting a full 1/3 of our sales tax, that always gives the concern long term of what happens if one of those top 5 has an unfortunate impact from any number of circumstances. For this particular period that I pulled these numbers, these are for December 2020 transactions, and construction is down at 14%. In the summer months, this is higher. The top 5 remains pretty consistent, and then the construction in the summer months takes a little bit higher proportion over from the all other. And again, the construction is cyclical. So when we're looking at this graph, this really does shows about 10 years of history. This is our January through December 2020 sales tax receipts. The blue bar is everything but construction. The red bar is construction. And we can see that even with the pandemic, we saw an increase in both non-construction and construction related sales tax. This is, to be perfectly honest, something we didn't expect to see. When the pandemic first it resulted in restrictions in March 2020, not only Sumner, but everyone around us anticipated just a drop off a cliff for sales tax revenues. The numbers that we heard bandied about were anywhere from 20% up to 30 to 40%. We estimated right around 20 to 25%. We have not seen that. We have seen impacts at an individual business level for some of our local businesses that have been impacted by COVID, but those impacts really have been mitigated by other one-time revenues and really other regular revenues that are coming in from the manufacturing and industrial area, that are coming in from some of our larger businesses. As people have really pivoted to an online model, we're seeing that we're seeing that those businesses that were able to pivot to that online are also they're having a steady sales tax remittance. So this is one of the things that we've been watching with Finance Committee for the past year. And honestly, every month I kind of go in and shake my head and I'm like, I'll take it. It's great news. It's just not something that we expected. And we're seeing this statewide. So there are municipalities that have been impacted more significantly than Sumner has. I think that's a testament to Sumner that we have a mix of retail that is attractive to people buying. So when I look at our sales tax revenue, kind of just overall year over year, and this tells an interesting story. We see 2018, 2019 actuals, and then we see our 2020 adopted. We've always looked conservatively at how we forecast our sales tax just because of the volatility. And the 2020 adopted was a 2% lift over the 2018 actual. And then COVID hit, and we expected the cliff. and we dropped our 2020 estimate just way down. And then 2020 actuals came in and we're like, oh, okay. So we really took a hard look at where our remittance is coming from. And we realized that we are 7% increase over our 2009 actuals. So that massive impact that we expected didn't materialize. And again, it's because those manufacturing and other one-time revenues bolstered our sales tax collections and really kind of mitigated the impact that we normally would have had from other businesses located in the city. And happy to answer any questions as I'm going through these.
Don't see anybody raising their hand, Cassandra.
So then we take a look at our other tax sources. This is our energy and communications tax sources. This is telecommunications, electricity, our natural gas, water, sewer, storm, and then the payment in lieu of taxes we get from the city of Bonnie Lake. For the most part, we are exactly where we would expect to be. We had a little bit of a drop from our forecast in electricity, but we had actually a little bit of an increase in our natural gas. Our refuse was higher. City water, sewer, and storm. Our water was a little bit dropped, but it was kind of evened out by sewer. And again, the collections have a little impact on this. And then our pilot fee was over our estimate. Our telecommunications had a little bit of a drop. We actually expect to see that. It's not as high of a drop as I had initially forecast, as more and more people move away from landlines and move towards a more cellular model. We also look at our charges for goods and services. This includes anything from special event fees to licenses and permits, and our building activity fees. Again, our budget to actual is where we would expect to be. We did have an increase in our building activities. That's something we do budget conservatively just because it's very difficult to forecast. And then we can see, so this is our building permit revenues. This is building permits, mechanical, electrical permits, and plumbing permits. And we can see kind of that cycle that really goes right along with the economy. As we start, here's the Great Recession in 2009. We start to rebound in 2010. We had a little bit of a drop in 16 and 17, back up in 18. And then as we 18 and 19 were just great guns. And we were still really busy in 2020. 2021 and 2022, we are budgeted. That is a 2% lift over the 2020 revised. So we will keep an eye on those as we see the building activity kind of come through the system. And then when we look at our actual expenditures in the general fund, all of our departments in the general fund kept within their 2019-2020 revised biennial budget. And then really this graphic shows you kind of the layout of where the money goes. And I believe that is my last slide, so I will just leave it here rather than moving on to the questions slide, and happy to answer any questions on anything that I've covered tonight.
Okay, that is a lot of stuff that you covered. But the short and sweet of it is it's good news.
The short and sweet of it is we did very well.
Right. I mean, I think the council and the staff moved ahead with the revisions to the budget, based upon, a conservative approach and wanting to make sure we didn't, cause problems. And as it turned out, people kept on buying stuff, maybe different stuff and different types of things, but, things kept on going. So it is good news.
We are cautious still. I think there's still a fair amount of uncertainty as we move forward. Hopefully with more and more vaccine availability, as we get more and more towards an eventual relaxing of restrictions, we still don't really know what that's going to look like. And so I think until we have a better idea of what that looks like and where the light at the end of the tunnel is here, we're going to stay cautious. I think there's still some uncertainty. But as far as 2020 goes, it could have been a lot worse, and it actually turned out very positive.
Yeah, no, it did. It did. And I know we're still in phase 2. And I don't know what phase 3 is or 4. But anyway, editorial. Okay. Questions, comments, council. Questions, comments from council. Patrick's given clapping his hands together. I agree with you, Patrick. Nice job. Excellent job. And I know that there are agencies that were hit a heck of a lot harder than we were, and maybe weren't as prudent in terms of their expenditures. And so, yeah, it's a nice position to be in.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Okay, Kurt.
Yep. Well done, Cassandra.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Yep.
I would echo that one. Doesn't get much better than if Cassandra does it and puts it together and puts it out there. And she holds everybody else accountable, out there, which puts a smile on my face. It's great.
Thank you.
Okay. Nice job. Great report. Great news. And thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay. We move on to City Administrator report. Mr. Wilson.
Thanks, Mayor. Just one thing for next week. We have actually a shorter regular council meeting, and we are tentatively, we're going to confirm this tomorrow, planning on holding civic clerk training right after the regular council meeting. So it'd be a special study session for about 30 minutes to go over all the features of civic clerk. I would encourage you, make sure you have, you're going to obviously have your computer with you since you'll be on the screen here, but we'll be asking you to access civic clerk during that training. So just a heads up. Other than that, I have nothing.
Well, that's actually enough. So you're saying we have a relaxed approach next week in terms of shorter agenda, but then you're going to sock 30 minutes of training on, afterwards. So, but you need to do this if we're going to move forward and we're going to function with that new system.
Yeah, and I'll just add, we have just a lot of stuff on the agenda over the next 2 months here, and I'm trying to really protect your 5th Monday in March. So, and not schedule a meeting then.
Good man. Thank you very much. Okay. Calendar issues, either council meeting, which Jason sort of alluded to, or committees. Any calendaring issues anybody has? Barb, are you okay? Go ahead.
I'll be gone the 22nd for the study session.
Okay. As long as you don't miss the civic clerk training. Just kidding.
I'll be here next week.
Yeah, just kidding, Barb. Anyway, okay, thank you. Any others? Kurt?
Do I have to do something prior to Monday?
Boy, that's a wide open question. If you're referring to training, no, you don't need to. Everything will we'll be walking through it on the screen with you, and you'll be getting an email after that that'll help you set up your account.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, any other questions? Okay, we do not have an executive session tonight. That being the case, nice job, everyone. And that means council and staff. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Covered a lot of ground. So you get to go home and, oh, wait a minute, you are home for the most part. Excuse me. Okay, you get to get off your laptop or your desktop, whatever, and go on to dinner plans. So this meeting is adjourned at 8:14. Take care, everyone.